In 1892, two people were brutally murdered with an axe inside their own home. The crime scene was horrific, the attacks were personal, and the killer made no attempt to escape. Yet the main suspect, a woman who may have planned everything down to the last detail, was found not guilty. This is the story of Lizzie Borden, and why many believe it was one of the most carefully planned murders in American history. The case took place in 1892 in Massachusetts, USA. At that time, Massachusetts was home to a wealthy landowner named Andrew Borden. He was 70 years old and owned a large amount of property locally. He was widely known as a rich man. Although the Borden family was wealthy, their household was not complicated. His wife was Abby Borden, much younger than him. They had two daughters, the older daughter Emma Borden and the younger daughter Lizzie Borden, who was 32 years old at the time. The household also included a maid named Sullivan. 5 people in total, including the maid, lived together in the Borden family's large 3-story house. On August 4, 1892, the older sister Emma left the house early in the morning to attend to some matters. Around 9 a.m., Mr. Borden also went out for a walk. Mrs. Borden was upstairs on the second floor cleaning the bedrooms, while the maid had begun her own cleaning duties. Aside from the bedrooms, the maid cleaned the rest of the house. Mr. Borden returned home around 10:30 a.m. after being out for more than an hour. At that time, the maid told him she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Mr. Borden agreed and told her to lie down. The maid went to her room on the 3rd floor, while Mr. Borden lay on the sofa on the 1st floor to rest. I've just described the movements of several people, but there was one person I haven't mentioned, the younger daughter, Lizzie. No one knew where she was at that time. About half an hour later, around 11:10 a.m., the maid, resting on the 3rd floor, suddenly heard a scream from downstairs. It was Lizzie shouting, "Sullivan, come quickly!" The maid hurriedly got dressed and ran downstairs, where she saw a horrifying scene. First, she saw a pale and shocked Lizzie. Beside her lay Mr. Borden. He had clearly been attacked. His head and body were covered in blood. Most shocking of all, his head had been split open, the wound cutting across his eyes and even splitting his eyeballs in half. Lizzie claimed she had been in the storage shed, heard a scream, and ran back to find her father already dead. At that moment, the maid, Sullivan, went upstairs to the 2nd floor to look for Mrs. Borden. When she opened the bedroom door, she discovered Mrs. Borden lying face down on the floor, her head completely smashed and bloodied. The two immediately called the police. Forensic examination later revealed that both Mr. and Mrs. Borden had been killed with an axe. The killer had been extremely brutal, concentrating almost all the attacks on the head. Mr. Borden's head had been split in half. Mrs. Borden suffered even worse. The first blow struck her face, likely killing her instantly, and the killer then struck the back of her head 17 more times until her skull was completely destroyed. The level of violence suggested intense hatred toward the victims. An extremely unusual detail was also discovered. The times of death for Mr. and Mrs. Borden were different. Mrs. Borden had died around 9 a.m., while Mr. Borden died around 11 a.m., leaving a 2-hour gap between their deaths. This raised questions. If it was the same killer, either the killer hid in the Borden house for 2 hours or killed Mrs. Borden, left, and returned later to kill Mr. Borden. Both possibilities were ruled out, as no one nearby saw any suspicious person entering the house. Additionally, neither Lizzie nor the maid reported seeing anyone else enter. Police also found no evidence of a third person in the house. Therefore, investigators concluded this was likely an inside job, meaning the killer was either Lizzie, the maid, or possibly both working together. The case was extremely difficult to investigate because there were only 2 witnesses, both of whom were suspects. Their testimonies could not be treated as evidence. For instance, the maid claimed she was resting on the 3rd floor and didn't see the crime. Only Lizzie could confirm that. Lizzie said she was in the storage shed. Only the maid could confirm that. Their statements could only corroborate each other, but since both were suspects, neither testimony had legal value. After long interrogations, police found Lizzie suspicious. The maid appeared extremely sad, fearful, and nervous during questioning, while Lizzie, who would normally be expected to be grief-stricken, remained unusually calm. This made investigators consider her the more likely suspect. Further investigation reinforced the suspicion of Lizzie. police discovered that Mrs. Borden was not Lizzie's biological mother, but her stepmother. Lizzie's biological mother had died of illness when Lizzie was very young. After her mother's death, Mr. Borden remarried Abby. Lizzie's relationship with her stepmother had always been poor. In fact, her relationship with her father was also troubled. Despite being wealthy, Mr. Borden was extremely stingy. Even when Lizzie's biological mother was alive, the house lacked running water and electricity, and it was in poor condition. Lack of electricity at the time was understandable, but the lack of water was extreme, all due to Mr. Borden's refusal to spend money on the family. He spent freely on himself, on food, drink, and entertainment, but was extremely strict with his wife and daughters, often beating and scolding them. These harsh conditions contributed to the early death of Lizzie's mother. After remarrying, Mr. Borden treated his new wife well, buying her jewelry and clothes, but the beatings and strict treatment of his daughters continued. Eventually, Lizzie stole her stepmother's jewelry box and pawned the contents. When her father discovered this, he killed Lizzie's pet pigeon, had the maid cook it into soup, and forced Lizzie to eat it. His cruelty had reached a near-perverse level. One may ask, Lizzie was already in her 30s. Why didn't she leave home? Why remain with a father and stepmother she despised? Lizzie admitted that she wanted her father's inheritance. No matter how he treated her, she stayed to ensure she would receive it after his death. However, she later learned a secret. Her father intended to leave all his assets to his wife, excluding the daughters. On the day the Borden couple was murdered, Mr. Borden planned to transfer part of his assets to his wife while alive. This gave Lizzie a perfect motive. She stood to gain everything only if her stepmother died first, followed by her father. This strongly suggested that the murders were carefully planned, not impulsive acts. Police now needed evidence. They searched the house and found an axe head in the basement, clean without a handle. Though tests showed no blood, its shape matched the murder weapon. Investigators suspected the wooden handle had been discarded because wood absorbs blood and is hard to clean. Unfortunately, the handle was never found. They also searched for blood-stained clothing. No such clothes were found. A neighbor later reported seeing Lizzie burning clothes in her kitchen a few days after the murders. When questioned, Lizzie claimed the clothes were stained with paint from the storage shed, but police suspected they were bloodied and already destroyed. Police also discovered that Lizzie had visited a pharmacy that morning to buy prussic acid, a deadly poison. She claimed it was for killing insects, but the pharmacist refused, saying it was far too dangerous. Finally, investigators noticed a chilling detail: the order of the deaths. Mrs. Borden had died first, then Mr. Borden 2 hours later. If Mr. Borden had died first, the inheritance would not have benefited Lizzie. Only the actual order made her the primary heir. From a logical standpoint, the case seemed complete. Lizzie was charged with murder and destruction of evidence. The case attracted massive media attention due to its brutality and the family's wealth. In court, Lizzie was ultimately found not guilty. Why? 3 reasons. First, there was no direct evidence, no weapon, and no eyewitnesses. All evidence was circumstantial. Second, there had been a series of axe murderers in the area around that time, with no perpetrators caught, so another killer could not be ruled out. Third, Lizzie had an impeccable social reputation, while her father's reputation was poor. She was a teacher at a local church, and no one believed she could commit such a brutal act. Her father's stinginess and temper were widely known. The jury concluded that many people could have had a motive to kill Mr. Borden. With no physical evidence, Lizzie was acquitted. The verdict shocked the entire nation. Later legal scholars argued that Lizzie's acquittal was largely influenced by unconscious bias, judgments based on impressions rather than facts. This case profoundly influenced American jurisprudence. After her acquittal, Lizzie and her sister inherited the estate. Lizzie lived until age 67, dying about 30 years later. The case became famous and was adapted into novels, comics, and films. A movie titled Lizzie was released in 2018. This was nearly a perfect crime. Its most important lesson? Be aware of unconscious bias, which can still affect justice today. That's all for today. See you next time. Goodbye.